Welcome to this episode of Religion and American Life, a podcast by the Blasey Center for Religion and American Public Life here at Boston College. I am Mark Massa, and I have the happy duty of being director for the Blasey Center, as well as today's podcast host. This podcast is an initiative of the Blasey Center's commitment to connecting a community of scholars, policymakers, media, and religious leaders in conversation and scholarly reflection around issues at the intersection of religion and American public life. Today, we are honored to have with us the President of Fordham University, Tania Tetlow, to discuss her experiences as the first layperson, as well as the first woman president of the university. Prior to her election as president of Fordham in 2022, Tania was the 17th president of Loyola University in New Orleans. She was the first woman and the first layperson to lead Loyola since the Society of Jesus founded that university in 1912. Prior to coming to Loyola, President Tetlow served as Senior Vice President and Chief of Staff, as well as the Felder Fayard Professor of Law at Tulane University, where she was a key strategic advisor to President Michael Fitz. As a law professor, President Tetlow's research helped persuade the Department of Justice to reimagine its regulation of constitutional policing. She also directed Tulane's Domestic Violence Law Clinic, for which she raised millions of dollars in federal grant funds. We are honored to have her with us. So welcome, President Tania Tetlow.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
What things did you expect to find when you took over the president's office at Fordham, and what things struck you as something you hadn't really thought about or things that you hadn't really prepared for?
Well, I expected to find deep Jesuit mission and a sense of purpose, and I hoped to find and did find a student body that was warm and diverse and willing to challenge each other, but to do it without self-righteousness. And that has been true in spades, as tested by recent events. What surprised me, in some ways, being in New York, I think of New York as this intensely global, outward-looking city. But in many ways, the world comes to New York, and New York can be very inward-looking and parochial in the literal sense of the word in our Catholic institutions. So how much people fixate on the Irish and the Italians and the deep tradition and history, but in a way that doesn't always look out to the rest of the universe. So that was a bit of a surprise, and it's a strength and a weakness, frankly. It's a deep community, very relational, and sometimes we have to remind ourselves to look at the ways the rest of the world does it.
As a Jesuit myself, obviously, I'm very interested in Jesuit values and the Jesuit tradition of education. Well, how do you see the Jesuit part of the Jesuit tradition of Fordham making a difference? What values or beliefs do you think a Jesuit education passes on to the people who study and teach there?
In several different ways. So first and foremost, the ways we teach, it can sound trite now because the rest of the world has caught up to us, but the Jesuit way of looking at educating the full person was not the way everybody looked at it 500 years ago or until quite recently. That sense of embedding purpose in our students, that we want them to matter to the world and they can choose how they do it and what issues matter most to them and what they think about those issues, but that we are showering all the support and teaching and skill building in them, not for them, but so that they can make a difference in the world. I think one part that gets overlooked of Jesuit education is the tradition of excellence, of learning that never leaves you, and of constantly being willing to question assumptions and challenge authority. We teach our students that with caution because they turn it on us quite immediately. And so I think what Fordham does is a level of academic excellence and pushing students, but with a mind to constantly having them make a difference to the world. 27 different institutions of higher education in the United States identify themselves as being Jesuit colleges or universities. Do you think that tradition of Jesuit education is the same or varies? How different are these institutions? So I think that the ways we express our Jesuit mission are in three different places. There's transformative teaching, which I just talked about. There's the research that solves the problems of the world, where the faculty themselves, while modeling it for the students, are trying to solve the world's big problems in an important way. And then there's the creation of opportunity, which was hugely important to the American Catholic education tradition, because while we had the elite institutions in Europe, in this country, Catholic immigrants weren't particularly welcome at the elite Protestant institutions. And so we've created schools for us when we were not allowed elsewhere. And so that creation of opportunity is a big part of what we do and who we are too. So that triangle, as I like to think of it, as teaching, research, and opportunity, comes with trade-offs of resources, of focus. Some of those things are rewarded with status, like research, and some of them are not, like creating opportunity. And so I think of all three as very important expressions of mission. And our 27 schools really run the gamut on how much of a balance they have, which part they focus on. A lot of our schools are very much focused on opportunity, and that is crucial. And so Loyola New Orleans was 40% Pell eligible. It was majority minority, had an extraordinary student body, just beyond talented, who got this chance in life, and the results make the world better. And so figuring out for each school how best to express its mission. And I think showing the world that it's not the chasing of status that should matter. It's thinking about the core of who we're trying to be.
You went right to the heart of the tough balance between availability and inclusion over against excellence, which of course all American institutions of higher education try to aim at. On any given day, that tension between accessibility and excellence, is that the thorniest thing you have to face as president?
It is, because parts of excellence, not all of it, but parts of excellence are very expensive. And I think the core of what we do in some of our scrappier schools is excellence. And it's done based on just an incredibly mission-driven group of faculty and staff who do it because they're in love with the students who are their fuel. Loyola was like that. And so they provide excellence in an affordable way, mostly because they make such sacrifices and are amazing human beings. Some of the excellence that is both important, but also bring status to a school, are things like the focus on research and paying faculty to do that research rather than to teach is part of the trade-off we make. And in that, it is a set of choices to make about giving our students the excellence they deserve, particularly the poorest of our students. They need more support, more chance to kind of move up to the starting line that everyone else got through privilege, but at a price they can afford. And bridging that gap is brutally hard. And it's brutally hard for two reasons for our schools. One is that we no longer rely on the incredible volunteer labor, effectively, of religious men and women to fully staff our faculties and staffs. And two is that we've had a huge disinvestment by federal and state governments in education in this country. So, it is very hard to bridge that gap to keep education affordable, mostly because we're asking of students that they bear the full brunt of it themselves, right? If K through 12 were not public, we would also be questioning the ROI of high school if you had to pay for it out of your own pocket. We understand education to be a public good when it comes to K through 12. Somehow we've lost sight of that in college, but don't get me started on that subject.
Now, you have an even thornier task, because both Loyola and BC, the university is basically in one place, whereas Fordham is divided at least into three places. You have what I always called the mothership at Rose Hill in the Bronx, the beautiful Gothic campus in the Bronx. Then you have Lincoln Center, downtown, literally downtown, and then you have the Westchester campus. So how do you balance those three very different neighborhoods and also three, I think, very different clienteles who come to those schools? How does the Jesuit part of Jesuit education look different in those three places, or does it look different?
So Westchester is much smaller, more commuter students, programs that in many ways have really drifted to online since COVID sped that up. But our students are split between Lincoln Center and Rose Hill. So it's not just, peripheral campuses and how you keep them included. We really are divided into half. And there's such different experiences. Rose Hill is in the middle of a much poorer neighborhood where you can hear every language of the globe and eat amazing food. And it's incredible. And within that, a walled campus of trees and quads and all the rest. And then Lincoln Center is more vertical. It is hard. So I really split my time between the two, having the community feel like part of a whole when we can't physically get them together easily. It's so close and yet so far. It's just a reminder of all the ways you run an institution across division, right? But every time I feel sorry for myself about that, I remember Ignatius used to have to send a letter on a ship and wait 3 months for it to get there and then see if he got a reply. So we make it work. But I'm torn between wanting to make it a more cohesive community versus leaning into the ways it's different. So Lincoln Center students who opt in tend to be more diverse, more female, more religiously diverse. Rose Hill students are more Catholic, traditional, et cetera. And so they're both very tight-knit communities. I don't know if I can make them into one or just go with the fact that they're two beautiful, different from each other and equally valuable places.
And maybe they shouldn't be made into one. Maybe that kind of pluralism is exactly what the future of Jesuit education is about. Now, when I heard that you were elected, somebody said, "Oh, that poor woman, the first woman to walk in as president since the Jesuits founded Fordham University." And I said, well, I know President Tetlow, she's kind of a force of nature. I'm not so worried about her taking over. Did you have more support, less support about what you expected in terms of support of being the first non-Jesuit and also being the first woman president? When you walked into that job, what was your experience?
So I've done it twice now. It's my gig. It's funny because I'm not really aware of how jarring it is because I'm just me looking out through my own eyes and to some extent, how hard people find it. They don't often say in their out loud voice. Every once in a while they do. I had a donor at Loyola I met with early on who said, it's not just that you're a layperson, it's that you're a woman that bothers people. And I looked at him and for once thought of the clever thing to say in the room and not a week later after fuming, I said, well, there's not much I can do about that you would approve of, which perfectly went right over his head. And then we were fast friends. I do think the bigger, well, I don't know which is the bigger leap, but the good parts are that I do represent visible sort of modernity and progress and excitement before I've opened my mouth and actually deserved it, right? So that gets students excited. I think for a lot of the women and men, the fact of a woman coming in to our schools that in most of American higher ed didn't take women in the undergrad until the late 60s and early 70s. So that's exciting. And I do think it's a risk to not have a Jesuit leading a Jesuit institution, right? Deeply trained with decades worth of understanding of the way of proceeding and the tradition. On the other hand, the opportunity is that it has been true for a very long time that we're at risk of losing who we are if lay people do not own the mission, right? That was already true. And so this moment of symbolism when the guy at the top is no longer a man in a collar wakes everyone up to that risk. And I think is a chance, if you can use it, to do better. And so I've loved being able to use not just the obvious moments, but 100 teachable moments to remind people of who we are and what the tradition is and why they should care, and to translate very overtly from what the language I know they might hear and how to persuade them. And the Jesuits tease me that I say all the same stuff they did, but people listen to me better. So I do think just saying it in a different voice when it doesn't seem like the company line and what you're supposed to do reminds us that it was just never true we could outsource mission to a handful of people.
Now, the thing that strikes me just in our short conversation here is that you ring the changes on the Jesuit carillon much more often and much more clearly than most Jesuit presidents. Most presidents of Jesuit institutions who are themselves Jesuits. Do you think that comes with being a woman president of a Jesuit institution, that people can listen to you and hear it more clearly than it can from a guy wearing a collar?
I think it's in some ways remembering what I didn't know before, of being closer to the understanding of the way the rest of the world often gets the core of who we are, but not the semantics of our language. And so I feel bilingual in secular and Jesuit. And so I think that really helps. I also love teaching. I was a lawyer who tried jury trials. It matters to me to persuade and to remember where the audience is and what they can hear and what will convince them. So I take that very seriously. And I think there's a way it can become rote if you're not careful. And so for you as Jesuits are so steeped in having known this for so long and in communing with people who also know the shorthand, that it's the way we in higher ed talk in acronyms and lingo, right? Forgetting that people don't know what those mean. So I think that is the opportunity. I also have found that I was nervous about whether I knew enough to do this role well. And my uncle Joe, whom you will know, is Father Tetlow, brilliant expert on Ignatian spirituality, laughed and he said, Tania, you had no choice but to learn this. My dad was a Jesuit for 17 years in the society and fully ordained, and then met my mom at Fordham, and the rest is history. But I really did get raised between him and my mom was a biblical scholar, steeped in all of it. And it feels like a language I learned as a child and thought I'd forgotten, but it's totally there and it's come back in a rush. And so I think too, that way that it's intertwined into everything else that I know and believe, and to discover that for myself again and to articulate it has been just a joy.
Now, of course, Jesuits have spies in every institution. And I myself, I lived at Fordham for 20 very happy years. So I know many people there. I think the Jesuit community immediately warmed to you. What were the pockets, if any, of opposition?
I think faculty are always nervous, period, having nothing to do with the demographics of the selection. But with them, I told them from the beginning, I know I need to earn your trust, right? And I'm just asking you to have an open mind, because if you decide that you can't possibly trust me based on what something 3 presidents ago did, lacking a time machine, then I just don't have any way to fix that. But no, I think it is somewhat generational, and it's some mix of layperson and woman. It's both. But I haven't had huge pockets of resistance. What I just rejoice in is finding common values, is being able to pull people back to who they are. And so I get more sort of prodding on my politics than anything, right? Someone who might be anxious about affirmative action, I'll remind them that they, like so many of our most successful alums, were a first-gen kid from the Bronx who the world totally would have underestimated, never given an opportunity. And look what that opportunity has meant to the world in the life and the career that this alum has had, right? And that will remind them of, oh, yes, I do believe in this, right? I do know what that feels like. And so I think that work of inspiring and calling people to a sense of the common good and reminding them of who they are and what they care about is the work. And so I've not had huge amounts of resistance, knock on wood, at least that I'm aware of. Also, Fordham did, as Loyola did, announced the fact that the finalists, who were secret, contained no Jesuits, so that people could get out their angst before it became about a person. But it has really helped that I always know that the Jesuits have my back, right? That they know the quality of training I've gotten and they chuckle about it. They understand how much I care and how hard I'm working to make sure we don't drift, and how the level of respect. And I think of all of you as like adopted uncles because I grew up among you. And I'm just so thrilled my daughter now gets to grow up among Jesuits too.
One of the Fordham Jesuits described you as a Jesuit.
Oh, I like that.
You know better than I. We live in a complicated time for higher education. The recent Supreme Court decision about affirmative action, and also in a very complicated political moment. And America is very divided, and the Catholic Church is very divided as well. How can Jesuit Catholic universities be a force for unity, or at least for sort of respectful pluralism and dialogue in our very complicated culture and church?
Well, it's a moment that inspires real cynicism, but I do think if anyone can help, it's us, in part because Catholic doctrine, when you're not picking and choosing, actually bridges the political divide in U.S. political debate, right? It is neither neatly Republican or Democrat. And to the extent the American church has cleaved, it's because it has ignored Catholic doctrine on the other side and split along the American political lines and not on the church's teachings. So I think that offers hope. Part of what we stand for is a real antidote to the increasing levels of individualism that have gone unchecked. We've always had a balance before in this country of individualism, which is important, and a more communitarian approach, that those have to be in balance with each other for the good of the whole. But individualism has taken over. And so it is harder and harder for us to talk about a common good. And without that, we are sunk. So that is something really important about Catholicism itself that helps us pull people back to a sense of shared values. I think the language of faith can cut through political rationalizations a lot more effectively. There's a reason the civil rights movement was a deeply religious movement, because it can remind people of what they've justified politically, that they really do care about something bigger and better than that. And so ideally, our campuses become the kind of places where we have debate of hard issues, where we allow that to happen. And at its best, the church understands that it's what we're supposed to do, even when it means challenging the church itself, that we have to be those places of inquiry and of intellectual humility, right? That we're seeking the truth, knowing that we could be wrong, and that we can model that for the rest of the world. But this is a scary moment to do that. I have found that the schools where I have served have had student bodies that have not leaned into self-righteousness, that have been really willing to do this kind of challenging and to do it with kindness and empathy and try to persuade each other instead of just to perform. Knock on wood, because we're still in the thick of it right now, and it doesn't take much to ruin that. But it does give me hope every day watching how well our students have weathered this last brutal month of debate over the Middle East.
What do you think that Jesuit universities can do for the church as a national community? And what are the elements of a Jesuit university that can really effectively help the church navigate these difficult waters that we're in?
Well, we're in mission territory, right? Something I remind the bishops, and I've been lucky enough that I've always had bishops who understood this, that we're not in a parish, especially one of those shrinking parishes where the average age is 70, preaching to the choir, right? We are the part of the church that engages with an increasingly secular society. We are the folks teaching young people who not only have grown up in other faiths, but most often grew up without any church whatsoever, how to respect religion as such, which is a harder battle than it sounds, how to learn our values, if not our doctrine, how to, as Father General says, we're trying to convert to our values. And that is huge if we can get there, and to do it in a way where they understand who we are and gain respect for who we are in a world that treats religion as anti-intellectual, as necessarily conservative on every point when it is not always. So I think what we have to teach the church about that is what we find in our campuses as we try to pull students in at the moment of free will, right? No longer like high schools where we can tell them they have to go to mass and have dress codes and such. They have to choose. But if they choose for themselves, it will hopefully be for life. And the way we do that is to be invitational and welcoming, not because we're diluting who we are, right? Not because we're running away from it with embarrassment, because it works. That when you are welcoming, when you tell people that our fundamental message is that God loves you and wants you to feel that love, that's what draws people in and gives them the confidence and the courage to learn the rest.
You convinced me. Tell me about your day. Now, I can only imagine. I was a dean for a number of years. It's a complicated job, and I just presume that a president is a dean on exponentially higher. How many days a month are you away? Do you spend your time at both campuses? Do you spend most of your days in meetings? Do you meet with donors, trustees, faculty? Like, what's a typical day in President Tetlow's life?
Well, the thing that I love, although is most people's idea of hell, is that every day is different than every other day. So it's all of those things that you said. I think, roughly speaking, I probably spend half my time internally engaging with the campus constituencies and managing the place, right? So you are the CEO who runs a big sprawling bureaucracy that, at Fordham's case, employs 5,000 people and has this huge budget, and then dealing with faculty, staff, students, and all the subgroups within that, dealing with culture change and how you get people to be willing to embrace a certain amount of innovation and change. And then half the time is external. So raising money, because that's how nonprofits in general, much less universities, are run in this country. Being part of New York City and making it better, city, state, federal politics, of the Jesuit constituencies. So I'm on the boards of the AJCU, and I work with the Catholic Consortium. And then there's NICU, which is all the private and independent schools, et cetera. So lots and lots of variety, and made more complicated by running between the two campuses. But I actually really love it.
So you have teenage children, right?
I have an 18-year-old stepson and an 11-year-old daughter.
Okay, so what do they make of their mother being the president of a big Jesuit Catholic place? Like, are they intimidated by that? Are they intrigued by that? What's their relationship to you as mother president?
So my stepson is in full eye-rolling adolescent stage, so I have no idea what he thinks about it, but I think secretly he's impressed. My 11-year-old daughter really grew up with this, because I'm trying to think how old she was when I started at Loyola, maybe 5. And I remember her asking me with real worry early on, "Mommy, if you die, do I have to become the president of Loyola?" Because she read a lot of princess stories where that would be true. So I told her, no. She's like, "Oh, thank goodness." She is so proud of me. And I love that this is her vision of what, a president of a university looks like, is someone who looks like her, quite literally. So
that's great. President Tetlow, thank you so much for our conversation. You are an impressive person. I always thought so, and this simply is another confirmation of that. Fordham is lucky to have you, and good luck on all your initiatives.
I appreciate it. You too. So good to be with you.
Thank you for listening to Religion and American Life, a podcast by the Boise Center for Religion and American Public Life at Boston College. For more information on the work of the Boise Center, the Center's schedule of events, or to listen to other episodes of this podcast, please visit our website at bc.edu/BOISI.